Winter's grip held tight over Crystal Lake that fateful morning. Mike Davidson never planned to be a hero. He was just a single dad trying to give his 8-year-old son Tommy a perfect Sunday. The frozen pond had always been their special place. But when piercing screams shattered the crisp morning air, Mike's heart stopped. Through the swirling snow he saw her, a little girl, alone, the ice splintering beneath her feet. Without hesitation, he plunged into the frigid waters, emerging minutes later with the trembling child in his arms. Little did he know that this selfless act would set in motion events beyond his wildest dreams. Could a split-second decision to save a stranger's child really change everything he thought he knew about love, family, and second chances? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather of Mike Davidson's wallet was worn thin at the edges, softened by years of anxious handling. Every morning he'd open it and run his thumb across Tommy's school photo, tucked behind the plastic window where a credit card should be. The ritual helped steady his hands before he counted out the remaining bills. Never enough, but always just enough to get by. "Dad, have you seen my blue sweater?" Tommy's voice echoed down the narrow hallway of their 2-bedroom apartment. The morning sun cast long shadows through blinds that needed replacing, highlighting the worn spots in their carpet. "Check the dryer, buddy. I ran a load last night." Mike's voice carried the warmth of patience, even as he glanced at his watch. Construction sites didn't wait for missing sweaters, and his crew would be expecting him by 7. The apartment wasn't much, but Mike had worked hard to make it feel like home after Sarah passed. 3 years had softened the edges of that loss, but some mornings, like this one, he could still hear the echo of her laugh in Tommy's voice. The boy had her eyes, warm brown with flecks of gold that caught the light when he smiled. Tommy emerged from the laundry closet, triumphantly wearing his favorite sweater. At 8 years old, he carried himself with a peculiar mix of childhood joy and premature responsibility. "Found it, and I packed my lunch already." Mike's heart swelled. "That's my boy. Though I hope you didn't just pack cookies this time." "Dad, I'm not 5 anymore." Tommy rolled his eyes, but his grin betrayed him. "I made a sandwich and packed an apple. The cookies are just backup." The morning routine was their dance, carefully choreographed over years of it being just the two of them. Mike would make breakfast, nothing fancy, usually oatmeal or toast, while Tommy packed his backpack and checked his homework one last time. They'd eat together at their small kitchen table, Tommy chattering about school projects or the latest book he was reading, while Mike savored every word, storing them up like treasure to carry him through long days at the construction site. Today's breakfast conversation centered on their plans for the weekend. The pond at Crystal Lake had frozen. Solid and Sunday skating had become their tradition. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Mike couldn't afford the fancy indoor rink downtown, but the pond was free, and something about the open air and natural ice made it feel more special anyway. "Will we practice backward skating again?" Tommy asked, spooning the last of his oatmeal into his mouth. "Sarah from my class says she can skate backwards all the way across the pond." Mike smiled, remembering his own childhood attempts at backward skating. "We can practice whatever you want, bud. Just remember, safety first," they said in unison, Tommy mimicking his father's serious tone before dissolving into giggles. The school bus would be coming soon. Mike helped Tommy into his coat, double-checking that his hat and gloves were tucked into the pockets. February in Minnesota showed no mercy to forgotten winter gear. As he watched Tommy climb aboard the yellow bus, Mike felt the familiar mix of pride and worry that had become the background music of his life as a single parent. His crew was waiting when he arrived at the site, thermal coffee cups in gloved hands, breath visible in the morning air. Mike had worked his way up to foreman through 15 years of showing up early and leaving late. The pay was better now, but with rising costs and Tommy's growing needs, it never seemed to stretch quite far enough. "Morning, boss," called out Jerry, his most experienced carpenter. "Ready to freeze our butts off building someone else's dream house?" Mike grinned, pulling on his hard hat. "Better than freezing them off building our own, Jerry. At least we're getting paid for this one." The work was good, honest labor that left him tired in all the right ways. Today, they were framing the second story of what would become someone's luxury vacation home. 5 bedrooms, 4 baths, and a view of the lake that would probably feature in some real estate magazine. Mike didn't resent it exactly, but sometimes he couldn't help wondering what it would be like to give Tommy that kind of security. Between directing his crew and checking the blueprints, Mike's mind wandered to the weekend ahead. He needed to pick up groceries, help Tommy with his science project, and make sure their old skates still fit. The list of a single parent was never-ending, but he wouldn't have it any other way. Every challenge overcome, every penny saved, every smile on Tommy's face, it all added up to something precious and entirely their own. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline winter day that made the whole world look like it had been dipped in glass. Mike and Tommy arrived at Crystal Lake just as the sun was beginning to warm the air. Their old Chevy pickup, the first vehicle in the snow-covered parking area. "Race you to the bench," Tommy called out, already half running with his skates slung over his shoulder. The familiar crunch of snow under their boots filled the air as Mike followed, carrying a thermos of hot chocolate and their small emergency kit, a habit from his construction work that had carried over into their weekend adventures. The ice stretched out before them, a perfect mirror reflecting the pale winter sky. They sat together on the weathered wooden bench, helping each other lace up their skates. Mike's fingers moved with practiced efficiency, checking Tommy's laces twice, always twice. "Remember what I taught you about reading the ice?" Mike asked, pointing to the subtle variations in color across the frozen surface. "Clear and dark. Blue is strong," Tommy recited, his breath visible in the cold air. "White ice means watch out, and gray or black spots mean stay away." They started their usual warm-up, making slow circles near the shore, the scrape of their blades creating a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of their Sunday mornings. Tommy was improving, his movements becoming more confident with each passing week. Mike watched his son glide ahead, marveling at how quickly children learned, how naturally they adapted to new challenges. The morning progressed peacefully until it didn't. The first indication that something was wrong was so subtle, Mike almost missed it. A slight change in the quality of sound coming from across the pond, where a small figure in a red coat was skating alone. Then came the crack, sharp as a gunshot in the winter air. Mike's head snapped up, his body tensing before his mind fully registered what was happening. Through the morning haze, he saw her, a little girl, no older than Tommy, her arms windmilling, as the ice beneath her feet began to splinter like a spider's web. "Tommy, stay back!" Mike's voice carried across the ice as he began moving toward the girl. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. He was hyper-aware of everything. The sound of his blades on the ice, the girl's frightened breathing, the expanding network of cracks beneath her feet. "It's okay, sweetheart, don't move," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady as he carefully approached. She was maybe 30 feet from solid ice, in an area where the water ran deep and cold. The girl's eyes met his, wide with terror, her small body trembling. The ice groaned beneath them both. Mike knew he had seconds to make a decision. The closest rescue equipment was in his truck, too far to do any good. The ice wouldn't hold them both. "When I count to 3, I want you to take a deep breath and hold it, okay?" he said, maintaining eye contact with the girl. She managed a tiny nod. 1, Mike positioned himself as close as he dared. 2, he saw Tommy at the shore, clutching their emergency kit. 3, the ice gave way with a sound like breaking glass. Mike lunged forward as the girl disappeared beneath the surface, his body following her into the shocking cold of the lake. The water hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Years of swimming and construction work had given him strong arms, but nothing could have prepared him for the paralyzing cold. Through the murk, he caught a flash of red. His hand closed around fabric, and he pulled, kicking hard against the weight of his winter clothes. The girl was limp in his arms as they broke the surface, both gasping for air. "Tommy! The rope from the kit!" Mike managed to call out between chattering teeth. His son was already running toward them, trailing the yellow safety rope behind him like a lifeline. What followed was a blur of motion and sensation, the rope around his chest. Tommy's voice calling for help, the scrape of ice against his arms as they were pulled to safety. Other skaters had arrived by then, someone's coat wrapped around the girl, another person helping Mike to his feet. "Sarah! Sarah!" A woman's voice cut through the chaos, another skater who recognized the girl. "Someone call 911. Mike held the girl, Sarah, close, trying to share what warmth he had left as they waited for the ambulance. Tommy hovered nearby, his face pale but composed, handling the situation with a maturity that made Mike's heart ache with pride. "You're okay," Mike murmured to Sarah, who had begun to shiver violently. "A good sign," the paramedics would later tell him. "You're going to be just fine." By the time the ambulance arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Mike insisted he was fine, but the paramedics were adamant about checking them both. As they were loaded into the ambulance, Mike caught a glimpse of Tommy being comforted by Jerry's wife, who had been walking her dog nearby. "Dad," Tommy's voice wavered slightly. "Can I come with you?" The paramedic nodded, and Tommy climbed in, clutching his father's hand. As the doors closed and the ambulance pulled away, Mike noticed a sleek black SUV pulling into the parking lot, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun. But he was too cold and tired to think much of it. Then, focusing instead on his son's warm hand in his and the steady rhythm of Sarah's breathing beside them. Someone was already filming with their phone, and Mike could hear murmurs about social media and local news, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was that everyone was safe, and Tommy was looking at him with a mixture of worry and admiration that made his chest tight with emotion. "Dad," Tommy whispered as they drove toward the hospital. "You're my hero." Mike squeezed his son's hand, too overwhelmed to speak. Sometimes the simplest moments contained the most profound truths, and, in his son's eyes, he saw everything that really mattered in his world. The hospital room felt too warm after the biting cold of the lake. Mike sat on the edge of his bed, refusing to lie down despite the nurse's insistence. Tommy had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, his small body curled up like a cat. The doctors had cleared them both. Mike was suffering from mild hypothermia, but would recover fully, and Sarah was already alert and talking in the next room. The sound of expensive heels clicking against linoleum echoed down the hallway, growing louder. Mike looked up as a woman appeared in the doorway, her presence somehow making the small hospital room feel even smaller. She wore a tailored wool coat that probably cost more than his monthly salary, but it was her eyes that caught his attention. They held the same warm brown with gold flecks that he'd seen earlier that day, wide with fear on a frozen pond. "Mr. Davidson?" Her voice was soft but carried an undercurrent of authority. "I'm Victoria Blackwood, Sarah's mother." Mike started to stand, but she waved him back down with a graceful motion. "Please don't get up. I imagine you're still recovering." She moved into the room with practiced elegance, her gaze taking in Tommy's sleeping form with a gentle expression that softened her sophisticated features. "How is Sarah?" Mike asked, his voice still rough from the cold water. "She's perfect. Thanks to you." Victoria's composure cracked slightly, emotion bleeding through. "The doctors say if you'd been even a minute later." She trailed off, collecting herself. "My husband Robert is with her now. We were in London when we got the call." Mike blinked, processing this information. "London? But that was only a few hours ago." A slight smile touched Victoria's lips. "Private jets can move rather quickly when properly motivated, especially when you own the jet in question." The pieces started falling into place. The Blackwood name finally registering. Blackwood Industries was a global technology empire, their headquarters downtown dominating the skyline. Mike had helped build 3 of their subsidiary offices over the years. I didn't know Sarah was... Mike gestured vaguely, not quite sure how to finish that sentence. Blackwood, Victoria finished for him, her smile warming. We try to keep our children out of the media. Sarah loves that pond because it's one of the few places she can just be a normal little girl. She paused, studying Mike's face. Though I'm beginning to regret allowing her that particular freedom. Kids need normal moments, Mike found himself saying, glancing at Tommy, even if they sometimes scare us half to death. Victoria followed his gaze, her expression softening further. Your son, Tommy, isn't it? Sarah hasn't stopped talking about how he helped with the rope. She says he was so brave, just like his dad. Pride warmed Mike's chest, chasing away the last of the cold. He's something special. Mr. Davidson. Mike, please. Mike. Victoria tested the name, then continued. My husband and I would like to speak with you once you're feeling better about your future. Before Mike could respond, a tall man appeared in the doorway. Robert Blackwood had the kind of presence that filled a room without effort, though his expensive suit was slightly rumpled, suggesting he'd come straight from the plane. Victoria, he said softly, then turned to Mike. Mr. Davidson, I don't have words to express our gratitude. Mike shifted uncomfortably. Anyone would have done the same. No, Robert said firmly, they wouldn't have. I've seen the security footage from a nearby cabin. You didn't hesitate, not for a second. He moved to stand beside his wife, placing a hand on her shoulder. We've spent the flight discussing how we can properly thank you. That's really not necessary, Mike started, but Victoria cut him off gently. It is necessary, not just to thank you, but because we've learned a bit about you in the past few hours. She held up a hand to stop his protest. Being who we are, we had to ensure Sarah was safe. So, yes, we did look into your background. 15 years in construction. Foreman now, single father, impeccable work record. And, Robert added, 3 commendations for workplace safety interventions. You seem to make a habit of saving people, Mr. Davidson. Tommy stirred in his chair, blinking awake. His eyes widened at the sight of the well-dressed couple, but instead of shrinking back, he sat up straighter. Are you Sarah's parents? He asked directly, and Mike recognized the protective tone in his son's voice. Victoria's face lit up with genuine warmth. We are, and you must be the young hero with the rope that Sarah told us about. Tommy blushed but maintained his composure. Dad's the real hero. I just did what he taught me about emergencies. Robert exchanged a look with his wife that Mike couldn't quite interpret. Then he turned back to Mike with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Mr. Davidson, Mike, we'd like to offer you a position with the Blackwood Foundation. Mike blinked, sure he'd misheard. I'm sorry? Our charitable foundation? Victoria explained. We fund community projects, educational initiatives, safety programs. We've been looking for someone with real-world experience to help direct our efforts, someone who understands both construction and safety, someone with, she glanced at Tommy, strong family values. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Mike looked at Tommy, who was watching the exchange with bright, curious eyes, then back at the Blackwoods. I don't have the education for something like that. I'm just a construction foreman. You have exactly the education we need, Robert countered. Experience, integrity, the ability to act decisively in a crisis. Everything else can be learned. Victoria reached into her designer bag and pulled out a business card, holding it out to Mike. Take some time to think about it. Call us when you're ready to discuss details. As they turned to leave, Sarah appeared in the doorway, wrapped in what looked like a cashmere blanket. Her face lit up at the sight of Mike and Tommy. Can I say thank you? She asked her parents, who stepped aside to let her enter. Sarah moved straight to Mike's bed, her small face serious. Thank you for saving my life. Then she turned to Tommy. And thank you for helping save your dad and me. The simple sincerity of a child's gratitude filled the room with something warm and real, cutting through all the talk of positions and foundations. In that moment, They were just two families connected by a twist of fate and a frozen pond. The Blackwoods left shortly after, taking Sarah with them, but not before Victoria paused at the door for one last look at Mike and Tommy. Something in her expression made Mike think she saw more than just a construction worker and his son. She saw possibilities. Tommy waited until their footsteps faded before turning to his father with wide eyes. "Dad, are we going to be rich now?" Mike laughed, pulling his son close. "I don't know, buddy, but I do know we're already pretty rich in all the ways that matter." Yet as he held his son, Mike found his free hand touching the business card Victoria had left. Its embossed surface felt like a key to a door he'd never even thought to look for, let alone try to open. The business card sat on Mike's kitchen counter for 3 days, its cream-colored surface catching the morning light. Each time he passed it, he'd pause, pick it up, then set it down again. The embossed letters seemed to mock him. Victoria Blackwood, Executive Director, Blackwood Foundation. Tommy had gone back to school, proudly sharing the story of his father's heroism with his classmates. The local paper had run a front-page story about the rescue, complete with quotes from witnesses, and a grainy photo someone had taken with their phone. Mike had already turned down 2 morning show appearances, uncomfortable with the attention. "You're crazy, if you don't at least hear them out," Jerry said during their lunch break at the construction site. They sat on steel beams, thermoses of coffee, warming their hands against the February chill. "How often does a chance like this come along?" Mike took a long sip of coffee before responding. "That's just it, Jerry. Chances like this don't come along for guys like us. There's got to be a catch." "Maybe the catch is you thinking you don't deserve it," Jerry replied, showing the wisdom that had made him Mike's right-hand man for the past decade. "You've got more knowledge about safety and construction in your little finger than most of those suit types have in their whole bodies." The conversation stayed with Mike through the afternoon as he supervised the crane operation, his mind wandering to the Blackwoods' offer between safety checks and crew directions. It wasn't just about him anymore. It hadn't been for 8 years. Every decision he made shaped Tommy's world. That evening, as they sat at their small kitchen table doing homework, Tommy looked up from his math problems. "Dad, Sarah invited me to her birthday party next weekend. Can I go?" Mike glanced at the invitation Tommy pulled from his backpack, heavy, cardstock with elegant lettering, probably worth more than their weekly grocery budget. "Where is it?" "Their house. Mom and Dad can send a car." Tommy read from the card, then caught himself. "I mean, her mom and dad." The slip hit Mike hard. Tommy rarely talked about having a mother, as if avoiding the subject could somehow protect them both from the loss. But now here was Victoria Blackwood, a powerful, successful woman who had looked at them with such genuine warmth. Later that night, after Tommy was asleep, Mike finally picked up his phone. The card trembled slightly in his other hand as he dialed. Victoria answered on the second ring. "Mike, I was hoping you'd call." Her voice carried none of the corporate steel he'd expected. Instead, it held the same warmth he'd heard in the hospital, making the late-hour call feel almost intimate. "I've been thinking about your offer," he said, moving to the living room window. The city lights twinkled below, reminding him of ice crystals on the pond. "But you have concerns." She finished for him. "That's good, actually. We need someone who thinks things through carefully." "I don't want charity," Mike said firmly, "and I don't want Tommy to think that one lucky moment changes everything. Life doesn't work that way." "No, it doesn't," Victoria agreed. "But sometimes life gives us chances to change it ourselves. This isn't charity, Mike. This is recognition of skill and character. Robert and I have been looking for someone like you for months, someone who understands both the practical and human sides of construction safety." She paused, and Mike could hear papers rustling. "Did you know that construction site accidents cost lives and billions in damages every year? Many of them preventable with proper oversight and training. The Foundation wants to make a real difference there. We need someone who's been in the trenches, who knows what really works, not just what looks good on paper." Her passion was evident, and Mike found himself drawn in. And what exactly would I be doing? Initially, learning about grant processes, proposal evaluations, regulatory frameworks, but also teaching us, helping identify where our money and influence can do the most good. Site visits, program development, working with local contractors. Like a consultant? Like a partner, Victoria corrected. We're offering you a full directorship, equal voice in program decisions, complete health care for you and Tommy, a salary that reflects the responsibility and your expertise. Mike's throat tightened. Healthcare had been a constant worry since Sarah's death had left them dependent on his construction company's basic plan. It sounds too good to be true, he said softly. Then let us prove it isn't. Come tour the foundation tomorrow. Bring Tommy. Sarah would love to show him around after school. No commitments, just conversation. Mike looked at the homework spread. Across their kitchen table, at the worn carpet and the patches he'd made in the walls. At Tommy's school photo on the fridge, his smile so much like his mother's. What time tomorrow? He could hear Victoria's smile in her voice. I'll send a car at 9. And Mike, thank you for being willing to listen. After hanging up, Mike stood at the window for a long time, watching the city lights and thinking about chances, choices, and change. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, but for tonight, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: possibility. The Blackwood Foundation occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, one Mike had helped build 6 years ago. Now he stood in its marble lobby, wearing the only suit he owned, trying not to feel like an imposter. Tommy stood beside him in freshly pressed khakis and a sweater they'd bought the night before, practically vibrating with excitement. Mr. Davidson, a young woman in a pencil skirt, approached them, tablet in hand. I'm Amanda, Ms. Blackwood's assistant. She's waiting for you upstairs. The elevator ride was smooth and silent, its glass wall offering a view of the city that grew more impressive with each floor. Tommy pressed his nose against the glass, pointing out landmarks they usually only saw from street level. Dad, look! You can see Crystal Lake from here! Mike followed his son's gesture to the distant glint of ice, now looking impossibly small from their height. Was it really only 4 days ago that their lives had changed on that frozen surface? The elevator doors opened directly into a reception area that probably cost more than Mike's entire apartment building. Victoria stood waiting, dressed in a deep blue suit that somehow managed to look both professional and welcoming. Mike, Tommy, welcome to Blackwood Foundation. Her smile reached her eyes as she approached them. Sarah's been talking about nothing else all morning. She's in the children's area with our education coordinator. Tommy, would you like to join her while your father and I talk? Tommy looked up at Mike, who nodded encouragingly. Another assistant appeared to guide Tommy down a hallway decorated with children's artwork and photographs of community projects. The children's area? Mike asked, as Victoria led him in the opposite direction. We have an on-site daycare and education center for employees' children, she explained. Part of our commitment to family-friendly workplace policies. Something tells me you'll appreciate that particular initiative. Her office was a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows, but what caught Mike's attention were the construction helmets displayed on one wall, each bearing the logo of a different contractor or project. From our major safety initiative, our partners, Victoria said, following his gaze, we're hoping to add many more. She gestured to a comfortable seating area rather than her desk. Please sit. Coffee? The next hour passed in a detailed discussion of the Foundation's work. Victoria was clearly in her element, passionate about their projects, but also brutally honest about their challenges. The truth is, she said, setting down her coffee cup, we have the money and the influence, but we lack practical expertise. We need someone who can tell us when our good intentions are missing the mark. Like requiring safety equipment that actually makes the job more dangerous because it's not designed for real-world conditions, Mike suggested, thinking of several examples he'd encountered. Victoria's eyes lit up. Exactly like that. Tell. In me more. Mike found himself explaining various situations he'd encountered over the years, equipment that looked good on paper but failed in the field, procedures that worked in theory but created new hazards in practice. Victoria listened intently, occasionally making notes on her tablet. "This is precisely what we've been missing," she said finally. "Real-world experience combined with a genuine commitment to worker safety." She leaned forward slightly. "The position is yours if you want it, Mike. Full benefits starting immediately, salary competitive with top executive positions, and most importantly, real authority to make changes that matter." Mike took a deep breath. "Can I see the children's area before I decide?" Victoria's smile widened. "Of course." The children's area occupied most of the foundation's middle floor. It was bright and open, with different zones for various age groups. They found Tommy and Sarah in the reading nook, heads bent over a book together, while other children played nearby. The sight of them, the construction worker's son and the billionaire's daughter, sharing a simple moment of childhood, friendship made something shift in Mike's chest. "They look happy," Victoria said softly beside him. "They do," Mike agreed, watching as Tommy explained something in the book, Sarah nodding seriously. "You know," Victoria continued, her voice taking on a more personal tone, "I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. My father was a mechanic. The first time I walked into a corporate boardroom, I felt like everyone could see right through me, to that little girl in handed-down clothes." Mike turned to look at her, surprised by the confession. "But they couldn't," she went on, "because that little girl had something they didn't. She understood the real world, not just the view from the top floor." She met Mike's gaze directly. "That's what we need here, Mike. Someone who sees both worlds and can help us bridge them." Looking back at their children, Mike thought about bridges, between past and future, between different worlds, between loss and new beginnings. Tommy looked up just then, waving at his father with a smile that held no doubt, no fear of not belonging. "When can I start?" Mike asked. Victoria's answering smile was warm enough to melt the February ice outside. "How about we start with lunch? I know a place with an excellent children's menu." As they gathered their kids and headed for the elevator, Mike caught a glimpse of their reflection in the polished doors. Not two separate families anymore, but something new taking shape, like spring sunshine warming frozen waters. Mike discovered the photograph by accident. He was reviewing old foundation files in the archive room when a folder slipped from the shelf, spilling its contents across the floor. Among the scattered papers was a newspaper clipping from 20 years ago, showing a much younger Victoria standing in front of a small automotive repair shop. The headline read, "Local mechanic's daughter wins full scholarship to Harvard Business School." He stared at the image, taking in Victoria's younger self. She wore simple jeans and a work shirt, her hands bearing the telltale stains of someone who knew their way around an engine. Her smile was different too, less polished, more raw with triumph. The article mentioned her father's shop, Winter's Auto Repair. Winters, not Blackwood. "Find anything interesting?" Victoria's voice from the doorway made him start. She stood there in her usual elegant attire, but now Mike could see beneath it to the mechanic's daughter who had climbed her way to the top. "I didn't mean to pry," he began, but she waved off his concern, moving to pick up the old photograph. "God, look how young I was," she said, touching the image lightly. "Dad took this the day I got my acceptance letter. He cried. First time I'd ever seen him cry." "Is he?" Mike left the question unfinished. "Still alive?" "Yes. Still running that same shop in Wisconsin." She smiled softly. "He refuses to retire. Says idle hands are the devil's workspace." Sound familiar? Mike thought of his own father, who had worked construction until the day he died. "Very. The board doesn't know," Victoria said quietly, "about my background. Robert does, of course. We met at Harvard. But the others?" She shrugged. "They make certain assumptions about people like us, Mike. People who know what it's like to count every dollar, to worry about making rent. A commotion from the hallway interrupted them, raised voices carrying through the normally quiet office. Victoria's expression shifted to concern as Amanda appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Blackwood, Mr. Harrison is here. He's quite insistent about speaking with you." Victoria's face hardened slightly. "Tell him I'm in a meeting." But before Amanda could relay the message, a man pushed past her into the archive room. He was expensively dressed, with the kind of tan that spoke of winter holidays in tropical locations. His eyes flickered dismissively over Mike before fixing on Victoria. "Really, Victoria? Hiding in the archives with your new project?" The last word dripped with condescension. "James!" Victoria's voice was ice cold. "I wasn't aware we had an appointment." "Since when do I need an appointment to see my ex-wife?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Especially when I hear rumors about her hiring unqualified people for executive positions. The board is concerned, darling." Mike felt his face flush, but Victoria stepped forward, placing herself slightly between him and James. "The board approved Mike's appointment unanimously, as you well know. Your concerns were noted and dismissed." Her tone could have frozen hell itself. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we're reviewing important documentation." James's smile turned cruel. "Documentation? Is that what we're calling it? Because the gossip around the country club tells a different story. The lonely widow and the heroic single father. It's like something out of a cheap romance novel." Mike stepped forward, but Victoria's hand on his arm stopped him. Her touch was light, but electric, and something in James's eyes darkened at the sight. "You lost any right to comment on my personal life when you decided your secretary would make a better wife," Victoria said evenly. "Now leave, before I have security escort you out." James straightened his already immaculate tie. "This isn't over, Victoria. The board won't stand for you turning this foundation into your personal charity case collection." After he left, silence filled the archive room. Mike could feel Victoria trembling slightly, where her hand still rested on his arm. "I'm sorry. You had to see that," she said finally, withdrawing her hand. "James doesn't handle change well. Or maybe he doesn't handle seeing you happy well," Mike suggested quietly. Victoria looked at him sharply, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. "Am I happy?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Before Mike could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Tommy's after-school program. "Sarah asked if Tommy can come over to work on their science project," he read aloud. "They're studying ice formation." Victoria's laugh broke the tension. "Of course they are. Well, we do have that excellent children's area upstairs, and I do need to finish reviewing these files," Mike added, gesturing to the scattered papers. "Then it's settled." Victoria's smile returned, warmer now. "Though fair warning, our chef makes hot chocolate that will spoil them for the powdered stuff forever." As they gathered the fallen papers, Mike caught Victoria looking at her younger self in the photograph once more. "You know," he said carefully, "I think that girl in the picture would be proud of who she became." "Would she?" Victoria mused, ducking the photo back into its folder. "Sometimes I wonder if I've strayed too far from who she was." "No," Mike said with certainty. "You've just built on her foundation. Same hands, same heart, just with better tools to make a difference." Victoria's eyes met his, and for a moment all the titles and wealth and complications fell away. They were just two people who understood what it meant to build something from nothing, to carry the weight of others' expectations while staying true to themselves. The moment was broken by children's laughter drifting down from upstairs. Reality resumed its normal flow, but something had shifted, like ice beginning to thaw in spring sunshine. Mike stood before the foundation's boardroom windows, watching snowflakes drift past the 48th floor. Behind him, spread across the massive mahogany table, lay the blueprints for what he hoped would become his legacy, the Crystal Lake Community Safety and Recreation Center. "It's more than just a building," he explained, turning to face the board members. "It's a bridge between worlds." Victoria sat at the head of the table, deliberately maintaining a professional distance. During these meetings, but he could see approval warming her eyes. Robert Blackwood, beside her, nodded encouragingly. The center will combine practical safety training facilities with community recreation spaces, Mike continued, pointing to different sections of the blueprints. A state-of-the-art indoor pool with lifeguard training programs. An ice rink that doubles as an emergency shelter during storms, classroom spaces for both vocational training and children's programs. He paused, touching the section that meant the most to him. And here, a memorial garden dedicated to workers lost in construction accidents, a reminder of why we do this work. James Harrison, still maintaining his board seat despite the recent confrontation, leaned back with a skeptical expression. And the cost? $15 million, Mike said firmly, with projected community savings of triple that amount over the first 5 years through accident prevention and emergency response improvements. That's a significant investment, James drawled, especially for someone's first proposal. It's exactly the kind of investment this foundation was created to make, Victoria interjected smoothly. Innovation, community impact, and practical safety improvements combined in one project. The board deliberation took hours. Mike waited outside, remembering other waits in hospital rooms, principals' offices, by a frozen pond. His phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. Did they like it? Before he could respond, the boardroom doors opened. Victoria emerged first, her face carefully neutral until the other board members had passed. Then she broke into a radiant smile. Congratulations, Director Davidson. Your project has been approved. The news spread quickly through the foundation. Offices. By afternoon, Mike's inbox was flooded with congratulatory messages and partnership proposals. But the response that meant the most came from Jerry, who'd been consulting on the project's practical aspects. You did it, boss, Jerry said during their site visit to the proposed location. You're really going to build something that matters. They stood together on the empty lot, their breath visible in the cold air. The lake gleamed in the distance, ice beginning to thin with the approach of spring. We're going to build it, Mike corrected. I want you as head of construction safety. Training once it's operational. Jerry's eyes widened. Me? But I'm just a carpenter with 20 years of experience and more practical knowledge than any 10 safety consultants combined. Mike grinned. Yeah, that's exactly who I want teaching the next generation. The project announcement made the evening news. Tommy watched the coverage with pride, sitting between Mike and Victoria on her office sofa. Sarah had dozed off on the other end. Her science project, a perfect crystalline structure, displayed on the coffee table. Dad, Tommy said suddenly, Mom would be really proud of you. The words caught Mike off guard. Tommy rarely mentioned Sarah, as if speaking of her might break some delicate spell. Victoria's hand found Mike's, squeezing gently. She would, Victoria agreed softly, just as I'm sure she's proud of you, Tommy. You've been so strong through all these changes. Tommy considered this, his young face serious. It's easier with family, he said finally, even new family. The simple wisdom of children, Mike thought, watching as Tommy carefully adjusted the blanket covering Sarah. New family indeed. The center would take months to build, but some foundations were already laid, stronger than concrete and steel. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, Victoria pulled Mike aside. There's something else you should know about the board meeting. His heart skipped. Problem? Actually, no, she smiled. After you left, Robert proposed establishing a permanent position for you, Chief Safety Director, overseeing all foundation projects nationwide. Mike blinked. I've only been here a few months. And in those months, you've demonstrated exactly the vision we need. She stepped closer, her voice softening. The board approved it, Mike. Even James voted in favor, though I suspect that had more to do with Robert's influence than any change of heart. I don't know what to say. Say yes, she suggested. Say you'll help us build something that matters. Not just here, but everywhere we can make a difference. Looking into her eyes, Mike saw not just the polished executive or even the mechanic's daughter, but someone who understood the value of building things that last. Someone who knew that the strongest structures were built on trust, vision, and maybe even love. "Yes," he said simply, and watched her whole face light up with joy. The anonymous letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped beneath Mike's office door sometime before dawn. The paper was expensive, the type used for formal invitations, but the message it carried was anything but elegant. "Do you really think someone like you belongs here? Go back to your construction site before you embarrass yourself and her." Mike stood at his window, letter in hand, watching the city wake up below. 6 months had passed since his first day at the foundation. The community center was taking shape ahead of schedule. His national safety initiatives were gaining traction, and Tommy was thriving in his new school. Everything was going right, which, experience had taught him, was usually when life decided to throw a curveball. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Victoria entered, carrying 2 coffee cups from their favorite cafe down the street. Her smile faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" He handed her the letter wordlessly. Her face darkened as she read it, a muscle tightening in her jaw. "James," she said, setting the coffee cups down with careful precision. "This has his fingerprints all over it." "Maybe he's right," Mike said quietly. "About me not belonging here." Victoria's head snapped up. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice fierce. "Don't let him make you doubt yourself. Not after everything you've accomplished. It's not just the letter." Mike ran a hand through his hair. "I heard the whispers at the charity gala last week. Saw the looks when we danced together. The construction worker and the CEO widow. It's like something out of a bad movie. Since when do you care what those people think?" Victoria moved closer, close enough that he could smell her subtle perfume. "The Mike Davidson I know cares about results, not rumors." "The Mike Davidson you know is still learning to navigate this world," he admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm speaking a different language than everyone else in those board meetings." "Good," Victoria said firmly. "We need a different language. The old one wasn't working." She hesitated, then added softly, "And for what it's worth, I like the way you speak. It's honest, real, like you." The tension between them, building for months, crackled in the morning air. Mike was acutely aware of how alone they were, how early it still was. Victoria took another step closer. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Robert received an offer to merge the foundation with Harrison Global." Mike's stomach dropped. "James's company?" Victoria nodded. "He's presenting it as a way to expand our reach, access more resources. But we both know it's really about control. About putting us back under his thumb." "What does Robert think?" "He's considering it." Victoria's frustration was evident. From a purely business perspective, the merger makes sense. But this foundation isn't just about business. It's about making real change, helping real people. "Like a mechanic's daughter," Mike suggested gently. "Like a construction worker's son," she countered, meeting his eyes. "Tommy told Sarah yesterday that he wants to be an architect now, that he wants to design buildings that keep people safe." The pride and pain in Mike's chest mingled together. "Victoria, if this merger happens—" "It won't," she said with sudden determination. "Not if we can prove that our current path is working. The community center opening is in 3 months. If we can show concrete results, demonstrate real community impact, then we fight," Mike finished. He picked up the anonymous letter, tore it in half, and dropped it in the recycling bin. "Together," Victoria's smile returned, warming her eyes. "Together," she agreed. "Though we should probably define what that means. For us, soon." Before Mike could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Tommy's school. His son had gotten into a fight defending Sarah from some kids, making comments about her father's new charity case boyfriend. Victoria read the message over his shoulder and swore softly. "I'll come with you to the school." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm, because Tommy was defending our family, all of us. And it's time we started doing the same. As they rode the elevator down together, Mike thought about family, the one he'd lost, the one he'd built with Tommy, and this new one taking shape around them. Sometimes the strongest foundations were built on ground that seemed the shakiest. At first, in his pocket, his phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message, this time to his personal number. Back off now, or the board learns things about Victoria's past that even she doesn't know. Mike deleted it without showing Victoria. Some battles he decided he would fight for her, not with her, at least for now. The email appeared on every board member's screen simultaneously during the quarterly review meeting. A detailed dossier about Victoria's past, including photos Mike had never seen. Victoria, as a teenager, working in her father's shop. Her mother's death certificate, highlighting alcohol-related incident. Newspaper clippings about her father's shop facing bankruptcy before a mysterious investor saved it. But it was the last document that made Victoria's face go white. Adoption papers from St. Mary's Home for Children, dated 30 years ago. Well, James's voice cut through the stunned silence. It seems our esteemed executive director isn't quite who she claims to be. Adopted from a children's home by the Winters family. Hardly the inspiring pull-yourself-up-by-your-bootstraps story we've all been sold. Mike watched Victoria's hands tremble slightly as she closed her laptop. The boardroom had grown painfully quiet. The only sound, the soft hum of climate control and the muted city noise 48 floors below. Robert Blackwood stood slowly, his face unreadable. I believe we should take a brief recess. But Victoria raised her hand. No, let's address this now. Her voice was steady, though Mike could see the cost of that control in her rigid posture. Yes, I was adopted. I found out when I was 18, right before college. My parents, because they are my parents regardless of biology, wanted me to know before I left home. She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. Does this change the work we've done? The lives we've improved? The communities we've helped build? James leaned forward, his smile predatory. It changes everything, Victoria. You've built your reputation on authenticity, on understanding the working class, but you're as much a construct as anyone else in this room. Perhaps more so. That's enough, Mike's voice surprised even himself with its quiet authority. I've spent my life on construction sites, and I know the difference between a genuine foundation and a fake one. Victoria's work, her vision for this foundation, her commitment to real change, those are more authentic than anything I've seen in this world. How touching, James sneered. The construction worker defending his meal ticket. Tell me, Davidson, did you know about her past when you saved her daughter, or was that just a fortunate accident? The implication hung in the air like poison. Mike started to rise, but Victoria's hand on his arm stopped him. My past, she said clearly, is exactly why I understand the importance of chances, of help offered freely, of building something meaningful from whatever foundation you're given. And Sarah, she turned to James, her eyes blazing. Sarah is my daughter in every way that matters, just as I was my parents' daughter. Family isn't about blood, James. It's about choice, about love, something you never quite understood. Robert cleared his throat. The merger proposal with Harrison Global is hereby declined. His voice carried the weight of decades of corporate authority. And James, consider your board position terminated, effective immediately. You can't do that, James sputtered. Actually, he can, Victoria said quietly. Because while you were digging into my past, you missed something rather important in the present. Robert transferred controlling interest in the foundation to me last month. It was supposed to be announced at the community center opening. The room erupted in chaos. James stormed out, promising legal action. Board members huddled in worried groups, whispering urgently. Through it all, Victoria sat perfectly still, her hand still resting on Mike's arm. Robert made his way to them through the commotion. I'm sorry, Victoria. I should have told you about the adoption papers years ago. I found them during the background check before your marriage to James. You knew? Victoria's voice cracked slightly. I knew you were remarkable, regardless of where you came from. Robert smiled gently. That's why I chose you to lead the foundation, and why I approved of your choice in him. He nodded toward Mike. Mike's phone buzzed. Tommy again. He read the message and couldn't help laughing despite the tension. What? Victoria asked. Tommy and Sarah won first prize in the science fair, their project on ice crystal formation under pressure. The judges said it showed remarkable understanding of how strength can come from stress. Victoria's laugh held a hint of tears. Out of the mouths of babes. The boardroom gradually emptied, leaving them alone with the late afternoon sun, painting long shadows across the blueprints for the community center. Victoria finally allowed herself to shake, just a little. I should have told you, she whispered. About being adopted. Victoria, look at me. Mike turned her gently to face him. I fell in love with who you are, not where you came from. Just like you did with me. It was the first time either of them had used the word love. It hung between them like a bridge spanning their two worlds, built on trust and understanding rather than steel and concrete. The center opening is in 2 weeks, Victoria said after a moment. Dance with me there? Even though people will talk, especially because they'll talk. She smiled, her strength returning. Let them see what real family looks like, what real love builds. Outside. The window, the sun, caught the distant surface of Crystal Lake, making it shimmer like a promise kept. The small diner on the outskirts of town hadn't changed in 30 years. Victoria sat in a worn vinyl booth, her designer coat draped over the scratched Formica table, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of coffee that cost 99 cents. Mike sat beside her, his solid presence anchoring her to the moment. Across the table, John and Margaret Winters, her parents, studied their daughter's face with a mixture of love and concern. We should have told you sooner, Margaret said, reaching across to touch Victoria's hand. But you were such a perfect fit in our family. It never seemed important. Perfect fit, Victoria repeated softly. Even with all my questions about engines, my obsession with taking things apart to see how they worked. John's weathered face cracked into a smile. Especially then. What better daughter for a mechanic than one who could rebuild a carburetor by age 12? Mike watched the exchange with quiet understanding. He saw in John's careful hands and Margaret's worried eyes the same love he felt for Tommy, a love that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice. Tell me about my birth parents, Victoria said finally. Do you know anything? Margaret exchanged a glance with John. Not much. Your birth mother was very young. She left a letter saying she wanted you to have opportunities she couldn't provide. We still have it if you want to read it. Victoria took a deep breath. Maybe someday. Right now, I have all the family I need right here, she squeezed. Mike's hand under the table. And speaking of family, would you like to see pictures of your granddaughter's science fair project? The proud grandparent transformation was immediate and complete. John and Margaret crowded around Victoria's phone, exclaiming over Sarah's smile, her careful explanations of crystal formation, the ribbon pinned to her dress. She looks just like you did at that age, Margaret marveled, that same spark in her eyes. She gets that from her mother, Mike said quietly, and Victoria's heart swelled with love for this man who understood so perfectly what family really meant. Later, driving back to the city, Victoria broke their comfortable silence. Thank you for coming with me today. Thank you for letting me be part of it, Mike replied. Your parents, they're good people, the best. Victoria watched the familiar landscape roll past. You know what I realized today? Every major change in my life has involved adoption in some way, being adopted by the Winters, adopting Sarah after her birth parents died, and now, Mike prompted gently, now finding a man whose heart is big enough to adopt not just a ready-made family, but all our complicated histories too. Mike pulled the car over at a scenic overlook. The city skyline glittered in the distance, the Blackwood Foundation Tower standing proud among its peers. But closer, just visible through the trees, was Crystal Lake, its surface catching the late afternoon light. "You want to know something funny?" Mike turned to face her. "When I was building that tower, I used to look up at it and think about all the important people who would work there someday. Never imagined I'd be one of them." "You were always important," Victoria said. "You just needed the right people to see it. Like a mechanic's daughter who became a CEO? Like a construction worker who became the heart of a foundation?" She paused, then added, "Sarah asked me something this morning. She wanted to know if it would be okay to call you Dad at the center opening." Mike's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "I told her to ask you herself." "But," Victoria's voice softened, "I also told her that family is something we build, together, one day at a time. Like that crystal formation project," Mike mused, "structure growing stronger under pressure." Victoria laughed. "Are we really learning life lessons from our kids' science fair project?" "Why not? They seem to have figured out some things faster than we did." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Victoria thought about the letter from her birth mother, still unread after all these years. Maybe someday she'd want to know that history. But right now, her history was still being written in Tommy's architectural drawings scattered across their kitchen table, in Sarah's careful science notes, in the way Mike looked at her like she was both the girl from the auto shop and the woman who ran a foundation and loved every version of her equally. "The center opening is next week," she said. "Ready to show the world what we've built?" Mike's smile held all the warmth of home. "As long as we're building it together." The scent of pine needles and cinnamon filled Victoria's penthouse apartment. In the kitchen, Margaret Winters was teaching Tommy and Sarah the secret family recipe for sugar cookies, while John and Mike struggled good-naturedly with an oversized Christmas tree in the living room. "A little to the left," Victoria called from her perch on the sofa, trying not to laugh as the men maneuvered the massive pine. "No, your other left." "You know," Mike grunted, pine needles stuck in his hair, "when I was building this place, I never imagined I'd be setting up a Christmas tree in it." "Life's funny that way," John agreed, adjusting his grip. "One day you're fixing cars, the next you're watching your daughter run a foundation. Speaking of which," he turned to Mike with a conspiratorial wink, "found a ring yet?" Mike nearly dropped his end of the tree. Victoria pretended to be absorbed in her phone, but her cheeks flushed pink. From the kitchen, Sarah's voice carried clearly. "Grandma, is it true that Mum used to help you make these cookies every Christmas?" "Every year since she was your age," Margaret confirmed, though she was always more interested in fixing the mixer when it broke down than actually using it. Tommy looked up from his careful cookie cutting. "Just like you helped Dad fix things at the center, right, Sarah?" The casual way the children had begun referring to each other's parents as their own still caught Victoria off guard sometimes, filling her heart with a warmth that no amount of success or wealth could match. The community center's opening had been a triumph, not just for the foundation, but for their family. Sarah had chosen that moment, in front of cameras and board members and the whole community, to throw her arms around Mike and call him Dad for the first time. The photos of that moment, Mike's surprised joy, Victoria's tears, Tommy's proud grin, now held pride of place on their mantle. "Trees up," John announced, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "Now, who's going to climb up there and put the star on top?" "I will," both children shouted, abandoning their cookie cutting to race into the living room. Mike caught Sarah as she made a running jump for the tree, while Tommy grabbed the star from its tissue paper wrapping. "Easy there, princess. How about we do this together?" Victoria watched as Mike lifted Sarah onto his shoulders, then steadied Tommy as he climbed onto a step stool. Together, the children placed the star, a vintage piece from the Winters family collection, atop the tree. "Perfect," Margaret declared, dusting flour from her hands as she joined them, "though I think we left the cookies unsupervised a moment too long." The smell of slightly overdone sugar cookies wafted from the kitchen, causing a general exodus to save the remaining batch. Victoria held back, taking in the scene. Her parents laughing with Mike as they rescued cookies, the children debating the merits of burnt edges, the way the late afternoon sun caught the diamond snowflake ornament Sarah had insisted on hanging first. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Board approved the national expansion. Merry Christmas to all of us. Another buzz brought a photo from Jerry, the center's first graduating class of safety certification students, proud in their new, hard hats. Hey! Mike's arms slipped around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Penny, for your thoughts? Just thinking about foundations, she said softly, and how the strongest ones aren't always made of concrete. He turned her gently to face him, brushing a streak of flour from her cheek, evidence of an earlier cookie decorating attempt. Speaking of foundations, he glanced toward the kitchen, where their family was thoroughly distracted by baking chaos. John might have been asking about rings for a reason. Victoria's heart skipped. Mike, not asking now, he assured her quickly. That deserves its own perfect moment. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking about it, about us, about building something permanent. Dad! Tommy's voice interrupted them. Sarah's trying to convince Grandpa that cookies taste better slightly burnt. They do, Sarah defended. It adds character. Just like her mother, John called out, dodging a playful swat from Margaret. Mike pressed a kiss to Victoria's forehead before they joined the others. Already pretty permanent, isn't it? Victoria squeezed his hand in response. Some questions didn't need asking, and some answers were written in the everyday moments of love and laughter that built a family, one holiday memory at a time. Crystal Lake looked magical in the twilight, strings of lights reflecting off the ice like scattered stars. The winter carnival was in full swing, with the newly completed community center serving as its hub. Children laughed and skated while parents watched from the warming stations, hot chocolate in hand. Mike stood at the edge of the lake, his heart pounding harder than it had the day he'd plunged into these same waters. The ring box in his pocket felt impossibly heavy. After weeks of planning with Tommy and Sarah, after countless conspiratorial meetings with John and Margaret, after Robert's knowing smiles at board meetings, it all came down to this moment. Everything's ready, Tommy whispered, skating up beside him. Sarah's got Victoria, watching the little kids practice their routine. Mike smiled at his son's slip. The children had taken to calling both adults Mom and Dad, interchangeably, as naturally as breathing. You remember your part? Tommy nodded solemnly. Sarah and I skate out first, then the music changes, then you. He grinned. Dad, you're not even listening. You're doing that thing where you look scared but happy at the same time. Like father, like son, Jerry commented, appearing with his camera ready. You had the same look right before you jumped. In After Sarah that day, Mike adjusted his skates one final time. Some things are worth being scared for. The winter air carried the sound of children's laughter across the ice. Sarah's voice rose above the others as she led her young students through their routine. At 11, she'd already become the center's favorite junior skating instructor. Victoria stood at the edge of their practice area, wrapped in a cream-colored wool coat, her face glowing with pride as she watched the children. Right on cue, the carnival speakers crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert's voice announced, please welcome a special performance from our junior skaters. Tommy and Sarah exchanged a quick high-five before gliding onto the ice. They'd practiced for weeks, turning their science fair project about ice crystals into a skating routine. As they moved through their carefully choreographed patterns, other young skaters joined them, forming expanding geometric shapes that mimicked crystal formation. Victoria watched, entranced, as the children created their living sculpture on ice. She didn't notice Mike skating up beside her until he took her hand. Beautiful, isn't it? He said softly. How they all come together to build something larger than themselves. She turned to smile at him, and her breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. The music changed, from the children's playful tune to something slower, more romantic. "Dance with me?" Mike asked, extending his hand. They glided onto the ice together, finding their rhythm as naturally as they had found their way to each other. The carnival lights sparkled overhead, and the gathered crowd faded away until it was just the two of them, moving in perfect sync. "You remember the first time we skated here?" Mike asked, guiding her through a gentle turn. "After the center opened," Victoria nodded. "You taught me that backwards crossover step. I was terrified I'd let you fall." She laughed softly. "You never have." The music swelled, and as if by magic, the junior skaters formed a perfect circle around them, each child holding a small electric candle. Tommy and Sarah stood at the front, their faces shining with excitement. Mike took both Victoria's hands in his, bringing them to a stop in the center of the circle. "I've been trying to find the perfect words for this moment," he began, "but everything I came up with felt too formal, too rehearsed. Then Tommy reminded me that sometimes the simplest truth is the best one." He dropped to one knee on the ice, and Victoria's free hand flew to her mouth. "I love you," Mike said simply. "I love our children. I love the family we've built and the one we're still building. I love that you see the best in everyone, that you fight for what matters, that you can fix both broken machines and broken systems." He pulled the ring box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a stunning yet elegant diamond. "Victoria Winters, will you marry me?" For a moment, the only sound was the winter wind and the soft crackle of ice. Then Victoria pulled Mike to his feet, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." The circle of children erupted in cheers, led by Tommy and Sarah's enthusiastic whoops. From the shore came applause. As John hugged Margaret, Jerry snapped photos, and Robert beamed like a proud father. As Mike slipped the ring onto Victoria's finger, Sarah skated up to them, her eyes bright with mischief. "Does this mean we're officially a family now?" Victoria pulled both children into their embrace. "Sweetheart, we've been a family all along. This just makes it easier to explain to everyone else." Above them, the first snow of the evening began to fall, each flake a tiny crystal, unique and perfect, coming together to blanket their world in white. On the ice, where their story began, they had written a new chapter, not an ending, but a beautiful continuation of what they had built together. The morning headlines hit like an avalanche. Blackwood Foundation heiress to wed former employee. From rescue to romance, ice hero captures billionaire's heart. Fairy tale or fortune hunting, questions surround high-profile engagement. Victoria spread the newspapers across her office desk, her new ring catching the morning light. "Well," she said dryly, "at least they used a good photo." Mike stood at the window, his jaw tight. The paparazzi below had tripled since the announcement, their cameras trained on the foundation's entrance, like hunters waiting for prey. "I'm more concerned about the ones camping outside Tommy's school." "Already handled," Victoria assured him. "Robert increased security at both schools. The children are being picked up by private car until this dies down." She moved to stand beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "It will die down, you know. Something more interesting will come along. That's not what bothers me." Mike turned to face her. "It's the implications. That I somehow planned this from the beginning. That saving Sarah was part of some elaborate scheme. Nobody who knows you could believe that, but that's just it. Most people don't know me. They see what these stories tell them. The working class hero who landed himself a wealthy wife." His voice caught. "I don't want Tommy growing up hearing those whispers." Victoria's phone buzzed. Another media request, no doubt, but she ignored it. "Come here," she said, leading Mike to her laptop. "I want to show you something." She pulled up the foundation's social media accounts. Below the engagement announcement were thousands of comments, not from gossip columnists or society reporters, but from the people whose lives they'd touched. "Congratulations from Local 457. Mike's safety program saved my husband's life last year. My daughter takes skating lessons from Sarah. This family showed her that dreams come true." They helped rebuild our community center after the flood. Real love, real actions. Mike read comment after comment, his tension slowly easing. I didn't know. That's because you never look for credit, Victoria said softly. You just do the work, help the people, love the children. That's who you are. She touched his face gently. And that's who I'm marrying. Their moment was interrupted by Tommy and Sarah bursting into the office, still in their school uniforms. Dad! Mom! Sarah waved her phone excitedly. We're trending. On TikTok. That's good? Mike asked uncertainly. Tommy grinned. Very good. People are sharing videos from the proposal. Everyone loves how we helped plan it. Some kids at school even said it was better than those fancy Instagram influencer proposals. Though James's daughter tried to say it was tacky, Sarah added, rolling her eyes. But then Tommy told everyone about how you saved my life, and about the community center, and about all the safety programs, and she looked pretty stupid. Sarah, Victoria admonished gently, but pride flickered in her eyes. Sorry, Mum, she looked pretty uninformed. Mike couldn't help laughing. When did our kids get so diplomatic? Speaking of diplomatic, Victoria said, checking her phone as it buzzed again. The mayor's office called. They want us to host the city's annual winter charity ball at the community center. Apparently, we're now the face of community unity and social progress. Perfect! Sarah clapped her hands. We can show everyone the new skating programs, and Tommy can present his architectural drawings for the youth workshop space. And maybe, Tommy added hopefully, we can finally tell everyone about the national expansion. Mike and Victoria exchanged surprised looks. How did you know about that? Please, both children said in unison, then dissolved into giggles. We pay attention, Tommy explained. To everything, Sarah finished. Victoria shook her head, smiling. Well then, what do you think? Should we brave the media circus and show everyone what this family can really do? The children's enthusiasm was immediate and loud. Mike watched them bounce around the office, already planning performances and presentations, their energy untouched by the cynicism of headlines or social media whispers. They're right, you know, he said quietly to Victoria. The best way to fight the gossip is to keep doing what we do, building things that matter. Victoria squeezed his hand, her ring warm between their palms. Together? Together. Mike pulled her close, their foreheads touching. Let them talk. We'll give them something worth talking about. Outside, the photographers caught their silhouette in the office window, and the flashes redoubled. But inside, surrounded by their children's laughter and plans, they were already building something stronger than any headline could break. The community center's conference room had been transformed into wedding planning central, its usual safety diagrams and construction plans replaced by fabric swatches and flower arrangements. But it was the hand-drawn invitation propped in the center of the table that held everyone's attention. Tommy and Sarah had worked on it together for weeks, a detailed sketch of Crystal Lake in winter, with two figures skating hand in hand, while children traced ice crystal patterns around them. Along the border, they'd woven construction tools and mechanical gears into an elegant framework that somehow married both their parents' worlds. It's perfect, Victoria breathed, touching the paper gently. Absolutely perfect. Margaret wiped away tears, pulling both children into a hug. Your mum used to draw like this, she told Sarah, always mixing art with mechanics. And your dad, John added to Tommy, has an eye for structure that you clearly inherited. Mike studied the drawing, noting how his son had incorporated actual architectural principles into what looked like decorative elements. Think we could get this printed for all the invitations? Already handled, Robert said from the doorway. He held up a stack of elegantly printed cards that perfectly captured every detail of the children's artwork. I took the liberty of having them done at our finest printer, though I didn't tell them it was designed by our youngest artists. Sarah bounced excitedly. Can we help with everything else too, please? Victoria looked at Mike, who nodded. They'd agreed from the start that this wedding would be about joining families, not just two people. Actually, Victoria said, we were hoping you both would do more than help. Sarah, would you be my maid of honor? And Tommy, would you be your dad's best man? The children's faces lit up with matching joy and surprise. Really? They asked in unison. Really, Mike confirmed. No one else we'd rather have standing with. Us. The planning sessions took on new life with the children involved. Sarah proved to have an eye for detail that matched Victoria's, while Tommy approached each task with his father's methodical care. Together, they created something unique, a wedding that would blend black-tie elegance with community heart. The Eid ceremony needs to be at Crystal Lake, Tommy insisted during one planning session. That's where everything important happens. In February, Amanda, Victoria's assistant, looked concerned. The logistics of an outdoor winter wedding would be perfectly manageable with the community center as backup, Sarah finished. We already have the infrastructure from the carnival. The adults exchanged amused looks at the children's professional terminology. They'd absorbed more from their parents' worlds than anyone had realized. The plans gradually took shape. A ceremony on the lake, weather permitting, with the community center hosting the reception. Local contractors offered to build a special platform over the ice. Jerry's wife, an amateur florist, designed arrangements that would withstand the cold. The center's culinary program students begged to help cater under the supervision of professional chefs. It's becoming quite the community event, Robert observed one evening, watching Sarah direct a rehearsal for the ice skating performance she'd choreographed for the reception. Isn't that appropriate? Victoria replied. This whole family was built by community. The media attention had finally begun to fade, replaced by genuine local interest. The society pages still speculated about Victoria's dress and the guest list, but the real story was happening in quiet moments. Tommy helping Mike select cufflinks that incorporated tiny wrenches in their design. Sarah and Victoria spending evenings with Margaret, looking through old family photos and adding new ones. One Saturday morning, Mike found Victoria sitting alone in their kitchen, surrounded by seating charts and timeline drafts. "Everything okay?" he asked, noting her pensive expression. "I just realized something," she said, looking up at him. "I've done the big society wedding before, with James. All the right people, all the right touches, all of it perfect and hollow. But this," she gestured at the organized chaos of their planning materials, including several of Tommy's structural drawings for the ice platform. "This feels like building something real." Mike sat beside her, taking her hand, having second. "Good thoughts? About marrying you? Never." She squeezed his fingers. "About all this planning, sometimes. Then I see Sarah teaching the younger kids their skating routine, or Tommy explaining his platform design to the contractors, or our parents working together on those handmade centerpieces. And I realize we're not just planning a wedding. We're showing our children how to build something meaningful, how to take different pieces, different lives, different families, different worlds, and create something stronger together." From the living room came the sound of Tommy and Sarah arguing good-naturedly over music selections for the reception. Their voices carried the easy rhythm of siblings who had chosen each other. "Speaking of building things," Mike said, "wait until you see what the kids designed for the cake topper. Apparently, it involves miniature ice crystals and tiny steel beams." Victoria laughed, the sound as warm as summer despite the winter pressing against their windows. Outside, Crystal Lake waited, its surface ready to host one more chapter in their story. Dawn broke over Crystal Lake in shades of rose and gold, the sun catching millions of tiny ice crystals suspended in the air. The morning was perfectly, impossibly still, as if winter itself were holding its breath for what was to come. Tommy stood before the mirror in one of the community center's offices, his small hands carefully adjusting his tie. "Like this, Dad?" Mike paused in his own preparations to help his son. "Perfect. Though I think you've got steadier hands than I do. Right now, that's because I'm not the one getting married," Tommy grinned, then grew serious. Dad, can I tell you something? Always. I think Mom would be really happy about today, about Victoria and Sarah and all of it. Mike's hands stilled on Tommy's. Ty, you think so? Yeah, she always said love multiplies. It doesn't divide, remember? Mike pulled his son close, careful not to wrinkle either of their suits. When did you get so wise, buddy? Probably around the same time you jumped into a frozen lake to save my sister. Across the building, in what was usually Victoria's office, another conversation was taking place. Mom, Sarah called from her perch by the window, the ice sculpture arrived. It's perfect, exactly like Tommy's design. Victoria turned from where Margaret was making final adjustments to her dress. The gown was elegant but simple, its clean lines reminiscent of well-engineered machinery with delicate crystal beading that caught the light like ice. Can you see the platform from there? Everything's ready, Sarah assured her. Jerry's crew triple-checked all the supports. Tommy insisted. Of course he did, Victoria smiled. He's his father's son. And I'm your daughter, Sarah said suddenly, turning from the window. Not just legally or because you chose me, but really yours, in all the ways that matter. Victoria crossed the room in 3 steps, gathering her daughter close. In every way that matters, she corrected softly. Always and forever. Margaret watched them with shining eyes. John's going to cry during the ceremony, she predicted. He always does at weddings, but this one, she shook her head. This one's special. The guests began arriving as the morning deepened. They crossed the frozen lake on a carpeted pathway that Tommy had insisted on designing himself, complete with subtle heating elements to prevent ice formation. The platform over the lake was a marvel of engineering and beauty, with clear walls to block the wind while maintaining the view of the winter landscape. Local families mingled with corporate executives. Construction workers chatted with society. Figures and children darted everywhere, their laughter carrying across the ice. The community centre hummed with activity as final preparations were made for the reception to follow. Robert found Mike just before the ceremony. Ready? As I'll ever be, Mike replied, adjusting his cuffs, the ones with the tiny wrench design that Tommy had helped choose. You know, Robert said thoughtfully, when Victoria first told me about you, I had my doubts. Not about your character, that was evident from the moment you jumped into that lake, but about whether you could handle this world we live in. Mike waited, sensing there was more. I was wrong, Robert continued. You didn't just handle it, you transformed it, made it better, more real. He extended his hand. Welcome to the family, son. Though I suppose you've been family since that first day on the ice, the ceremony itself was a blur of crystal-clear moments strung together like beads on a string. Tommy standing tall and proud as best man, his mother's wedding ring now resized, as a pin on his lapel. Sarah performing a perfect solo skate down the aisle as maid of honor, scattering crystal-like rose petals in her wake. Then Victoria appeared, and the world seemed to hold its breath again. She walked toward him on John's arm, but her eyes never left Mike's face. In that moment, he saw everything: the mechanic's daughter, the corporate leader, the devoted mother, the woman who had chosen him just as surely as he had chosen her. Their vows were simple but profound. They had decided to write their own, and each had separately chosen to incorporate building metaphors that made their children giggle knowingly. I promise to be the foundation you can always build on, Mike said, and I promise to be the force that helps you rise higher than you ever thought possible, Victoria responded. When it came time for the family portions of the ceremony, both children had surprises prepared. Tommy presented the rings on a small steel beam he had helped forge in the center's workshop. Sarah performed a brief ice dance that traced the pattern of their combined initials into the lake's surface. By the power vested in me, the officiant said finally, and with the blessing of this community gathered here today, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Their kiss was met with cheers that echoed across the lake. As they turned to face their guests, Sarah and Tommy rushed forward for a family embrace that quickly included John, Margaret, and Robert. Above them, the winter sun reached its zenith, setting the ice crystals in the air, dancing like stars in daylight. The lake that had brought them together now held them all, supported by love, engineering, and the strength of bonds freely chosen. Spring came early that year, the ice on Crystal Lake breaking up weeks ahead of schedule. Victoria watched it happen from her office window, thinking how appropriate it seemed, like the world itself celebrating new beginnings. "Mom!" Sarah burst into the office, waving a tablet. The Seattle Center just sent their final approval. Tommy's safety modifications for their ice rink got approved by the city council. At 13, Sarah had grown into her role as unofficial youth ambassador for the foundation's expansion projects. Her brother's growing interest in architectural safety features had created an unexpected synergy that was rapidly becoming the foundation's trademark: family-centered design with safety at its core. "Is that my architect I hear being mentioned?" Mike's voice came from the doorway. He'd just returned from 3 days in Boston, overseeing their newest community center location. "Dad!" Sarah rushed to hug him. "How was the site survey?" "Perfect timing, actually. The construction team there had some suggestions for improving Tommy's design. Speaking of which," he turned to Victoria, "our son is currently in the workshop with Jerry, discussing load-bearing calculations for the rooftop garden project." Victoria smiled at the pride in Mike's voice when he said, "Our son." The months since their wedding had transformed them from 2 separate families into something seamlessly whole. The children switched effortlessly between calling them Mom and Dad, and their different backgrounds had become strengths rather than divisions. "The board meeting went well," she told him, moving to kiss him hello. Robert's retirement announcement was met with exactly 0 surprise, and the succession plan was unanimously approved. "So it's official?" Mike's eyes crinkled with pride. "The foundation is all yours?" "Ours," Victoria corrected. "Co-directors, remember?" Robert insisted that true progress needs both vision and practical experience. She laughed softly, though I suspect he just wanted to ensure we'd have to keep working together. As if we'd have it any other way. Their conversation was interrupted by Tommy's arrival, his tablet covered in sketches and calculations. At 12, he'd already begun taking advanced engineering classes online, supported by both his parents' different but complementary perspectives on building things that last. "Dad, Jerry thinks we can increase the garden capacity by 15% if we adjust the support structure here and here." He pointed to his drawings. "And Sarah, I figured out how to incorporate a practice rink into the Seattle design without compromising the emergency shelter space." "My brilliant children," Victoria murmured, watching them bend over the tablets together, discussing their ideas with the easy confidence of kids who'd grown up knowing their voices mattered. The foundation's national expansion had taken on a life of its own, with requests coming in from cities across the country. Each new community center incorporated elements from their original: ice rinks, safety training facilities, family spaces, but adapted to local needs and conditions. "The Detroit team called," Mike mentioned, scrolling through his phone. "They want us all there for their groundbreaking next month. Apparently, the local kids have specifically requested a demonstration from the skating scientist and the safety architect." Sarah and Tommy exchanged excited looks. Their reputation had grown along with the foundation's, their unique combination of skills and interests becoming part of the organization's story. "Can we stop in Wisconsin on the way?" Sarah asked. "Grandpa John promised to show me how to rebuild a transmission, and I have some ideas for improving the shop's safety protocols. And Grandma Margaret said she'd help me with the calculations for the angle of the Detroit roof," Tommy added. "She used to teach math, you know." Victoria caught Mike's eye over their children's heads, sharing a moment of pure joy. Their family had grown beyond anything they could have imagined that day on the frozen lake. Not just the 4 of them, but an entire network of communities coming together to build something meaningful. "I have an idea," Mike said suddenly. Why don't we take the long way to Detroit? We can visit all the centers under construction, let the kids see their designs coming to life. A family road trip? Victoria raised an eyebrow. How delightfully normal, with stops at construction sites and mechanical workshops. Tommy grinned. And ice rinks for safety demonstrations, Sarah added hopefully. Sounds perfect, Victoria declared. After all, this family has always done things a little differently. Looking around at her office, at the children's drawings pinned next to safety certificates, at the family photos mixed with architectural awards, at the man she loved and the family they'd built together, Victoria felt a deep sense of rightness. They had taken two separate worlds and created something entirely new, something that would continue growing and changing long after the ice melted each spring. 1 year to the day after Mike had plunged into Crystal Lake's frozen waters, the Davidson Winters family stood at its edge again. The community center behind them hummed with activity, its walls now covered in photographs documenting not just their story, but the stories of countless families who had found their own beginnings here. Hard to believe it's only been a year, Mike said, watching Tommy help a group of younger children adjust their skates. His son had developed into a natural teacher, combining his father's patience with his mother's gift for explanation. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, Victoria agreed, her arm linked through his. Other times it feels like we've been family forever. Sarah glided past them on the ice, leading her advanced skating safety class through their warm-up routines. She'd grown too, her initial interest in ice crystals expanding into a fascinating blend of science and sport that was drawing attention from winter sports programs across the country. "Mom, Dad," Tommy called out, waving them over, "we're ready for the demonstration." The demonstration had become something of a tradition, their family's way of marking this anniversary. Sarah and Tommy had choreographed it together, incorporating elements of physics, architecture, and beauty into a performance that told their story without words. As they took their positions on the ice, Victoria squeezed Mike's hand. "Ready to show them how it's done, Mr. Davidson?" "Always, Mrs. Davidson Winters," he replied with a smile. They skated together now with the ease of long practice, their movements synchronized as naturally as their lives had become. Around them, Sarah and Tommy traced complex patterns that mimicked the molecular structure of ice, while their students followed in simpler variations. From the shore, John and Margaret watched with Robert, all three grandparents beaming with pride. Jerry stood nearby, filming for the Foundation's archives, his wife passing out hot chocolate to spectators. The Foundation's success had exceeded everyone's expectations. 10 new centers were under construction across the country, each one incorporating elements of Tommy's safety-conscious designs and Sarah's innovative programming. Victoria and Mike's co-leadership had created a model of practical idealism that was changing how corporate philanthropy worked. But here, on this ice, they were just a family, moving together, supporting each other, building something beautiful, one moment at a time. As the demonstration ended, Sarah gathered her students for a final lesson. "Remember," she told them, her voice carrying clearly across the ice, "the strongest structures aren't always the most rigid. Sometimes strength comes from knowing how to bend without breaking, how to support each other, how to grow together." Tommy joined her, adding, "And the safest designs aren't always the most obvious. Sometimes safety comes from understanding each other, from building trust, from creating spaces where everyone belongs." Mike and Victoria exchanged proud glances. Their children had absorbed not just the practical lessons they'd taught, but the deeper ones as well, about family, about community, about building things that last. As the winter sun began to set, painting the ice in shades of gold and rose, families gathered for the evening skating session. The lake that had once been a simple recreation spot had become the heart of something larger, a place where different worlds met and merged, where stories began and grew, where love built bridges, stronger than steel and warmer than any shelter. "Thank you," Victoria said softly, drawing Mike close as they watched their children help newcomers onto the ice. For what? For jumping into that lake. For taking a chance on us. For helping me build something real. Mike kissed her gently, tasting winter air and joy. Thank you for showing me that some risks are worth taking, that some foundations are built on trust rather than concrete, that family is something we choose every day. Around them, Crystal Lake reflected the last rays of sunlight, its surface marked by the tracks of countless skaters, each path unique, each pattern connecting to others, creating a web of community as intricate and beautiful as the ice crystals that had first brought them together. Sarah and Tommy skated up to their parents, cheeks flushed with cold and happiness. Race you to the far shore, Sarah challenged. Family style, Tommy added with a grin. Family style, Mike and Victoria agreed, taking their children's hands. Together, they glided forward into the gathering dusk, their laughter echoing across the lake, where their story had begun, not with once upon a time, but with a moment of courage that had changed everything. Above them, the first stars began to appear, twinkling like ice crystals in the winter sky, witnessing another chapter in a story that would continue growing, building, and strengthening with each passing season.